Hello, everybody, and welcome. I'm Bonnie Halper. I write the weekly Startup One Stop newsletter, and I'll put the link in the chat. And I work with founders on their pitch decks and make introductions to strategic partners and investors where and when appropriate. Welcome everybody. And once again, we're hosting it's the Joe and Glenn show, which is always fun. And Joseph Katz, why don't you introduce yourself?
Good morning, everyone. It is a full house today, and it will be a dynamic conversation. So
Yes.
Let's keep our intros short. You can feel free to add anything you want to the chat. My name is Joseph Katz. I help startups go from unknown to well-known using strategic marketing, go-to-market strategies, planning, etc. I've been part of some early-stage companies that have had some exits and some companies that have failed. So I've seen the full spectrum of success and failure as it relates to early-stage companies. So excited for today's conversation. And Bonnie, I'll try to help you monitor the bouncing faces today.
I know. So, guys, you want us to have everybody introduce themselves first? Briefly, very briefly. So, John, take it away since you sort of kicked us off earlier.
Yeah, sure. My background is in healthcare. I'm now on the business side of healthcare, although I'm expanding to other things like Major League Rugby and stuff. I currently work as a fractional executive, working with a commercial real estate finance firm at the moment, and we'll see where MLR goes. And I've talked to Joe about a little brewing concept that is more of my life's work in being a pair founder is what I call it. But that's something I'm going to work on over the long run. Other than that, I'm from Los Angeles, and I'm just happy and thankful to be here.
Yeah, considering the fires, we're happy you're here too.
Thank you.
To Jonathan's iPhone.
I'm John Kelly. I'm the founder of Space Cowboy. It started out as a one-to-one THC CBD inhaler. We quickly realized that we needed to add more SKUs. We added a mushroom lion's mane inhaler. Launched this last year. Just been going through explosive growth and all the pitfalls and journeys of entrepreneurship. And I really, as John, you really did a good job describing how fun these calls can be. So I do get a lot of information from all this, and I want to thank everyone for putting this on.
Oh, thank you for being here. Henrik.
Yes, good morning. Henrik Leborg. I'm a fractional CFO based in Toronto. I work with startups and scale-ups in the technology and business services markets.
Thank you. See, that's what we like. Nice intro. Alec, welcome.
Hey, Bonnie. Great to see you. My name's Alec Bogus. I work with Joe Milam at AngelSpan and the Texas Legacy Fund.
Ian.
Well, good morning, everybody. Thanks, Bonnie. So Ian Garmez, COO of Virtual Film School, based in LA. I'm in Toronto. We are an online school for aspiring influencers, and we're now also doing some marketing consulting work. Happy to be here.
And we're happy to see you. I know Andrea's in the Middle East and can't really introduce herself. Sorry about that. Shelley.
Hi, everybody. I'm Shelley Rankin. I'm the founder of a company called Create Vet. I'm a microbiologist, and I'm hoping to bring diagnostic tests in home for your pets. Great to be here. Thank you, everybody. Thanks, Bonnie, for arranging this at the last minute.
Oh, sure. No
Thank you.
Avi, welcome again. Anyway. Oh, you're muted if you want to introduce yourself.
Hi, morning. I'm Annie and currently working at a influencer media agency. It's a project manager by day and also have my own agency. So I'm happy to help and based out of New York. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. Put your contact information in the chat. Dr. Brian Sykes, and I want you to know that I'm a member of the Brian Sykes fan club. So Brian.
Thank you, Bonnie. Brian Sykes here from Durban, South Africa. Physician by training, but been an acquisition entrepreneur all of my adult life. I am managing partner of a holdings company that spans several sectors and industries, and also a founding partner of Global Healthcare Equivalency, which has global population health projects and now 12 countries at this point. So thank you for being here.
Thank you. Carson.
Hi, I'm a chemical engineer based in Austin, Texas. I'm just now starting my venture into entrepreneurship, and I'm looking to start a battery materials production company.
Okay, we'll try to talk you out of it. No worries. Emma.
Hello, Emma Vatopoulos here. I work for a small business development agency helping startups grow. I also advise startups in fundraising and formerly worked in VC. Nice to meet everyone.
Oh, welcome.
Based in New York. Thanks.
Josh.
Hi, how you doing? Okay, I'm Josh. Try to keep it as short as I can. I'm co-founder of the Reprobate Electric Motorcycles. What we're doing is we're basically trying to put a little bit more old school back into the electric motorcycle industry. We've actually just switched focus now. We've got the bikes where we want them to be, but we started working on an app which would basically break down where you, if you want to go from point A to point B, where you need to stop, how long you need to stop for, what's around, how you're going to pay for it. And then also what we're doing is breaking down how much is the trip going to cost you in electricity, how much is the ride going to be, and if you're going to stop, where. That's the short end of the stick.
Ah, thank you. Lon, welcome.
Good morning, everybody. I'm Lon Taylor. I am the founder and owner of a market research company called First Insights. We have helped lots of startups with their marketing efforts, with understanding their customers, and our focus is really UX research. We also work with a ton of enterprise level companies. And also wanted to shout out, if anyone is heading to South by Southwest in a few weeks, let me know. I am heading to South by Southwest.
Oh, I might be. Matt Bishop, who must be very, very busy these days because he doesn't have time for me anymore. Matt.
Sorry, Bonnie. I'm Matt Bishop, founder and CEO of Open City Labs. We are an AI-powered digital health startup that unifies the patient record and then generates a person-centered care plan that lays out essentially a checklist of things that each care team member needs to do, including the medically tailored meals provider for the diabetic or fall prevention program. So really focusing on prevention and wellness. Happy to be here and learn from our speakers.
Thank you. Matt Bassarico.
Good morning, everyone. So I am the Chief Investment Officer of a holding company. We particularly invest in the green technology projects, but we're always looking at all different types of tech. Start our checks around $5 million and go north from there. So look forward to meeting everybody.
Ah, thank you. Natalia.
Hey, how are you? Just
Oh, you're muted, Natalia. Oh, we'll come
yeah.
back. Okay, there we
Yeah,
go.
I'm here. Yeah. Hey, how are you, everybody? My name is Natalia, and I love privacy on my MacBook. It's always give me a second to appear. Magic. So I do fractional CMO for Chamber of Commerce and also wealth management companies located in New York City. And I'm glad to be here and to meet you all.
Oh, thank you. Randy.
Good morning, Randy Seif, CEO and co-founder of Troon. We're a global impact luxury brand sitting at the intersection of sustainability, fashion, and technology. Our digital ecosystem is a made-to-measure and on-demand platform which allows you to customize your casual everyday essentials, which get made and shipped in 2 weeks. And we have all proprietary materials, fabrics, and packaging developed with circularity as the key driver in the whole process.
Ah, thank you. Scott Purdy.
Good morning. Scott Purdy here at Sine, one of the founders based out of Philadelphia. Got to say, go Eagles. It was a good game for us. Our product basically takes multiple video inputs from anywhere at any time, loads it up into the system, and in a very short time creates a finished professional movie or video project. And as most, well, not most of you, but some of you know, I do part-time acting, and I'm currently in a docuseries called Scamanda, which is on TV tonight on ABC, 9 o'clock Eastern time. It'll be the third episode. I got a lot of screen time in episode 1, not so much last week, but we'll see how tonight goes. But anyway, I love being part of this group. I've been coming for a while, and I'm excited to hear Joe and Glenn what they have to say today.
And we always look forward to it. Zarin, one of these days I'm going to start with you, Zarin, because it's so unfair that your name starts with a Z.
I'm Zarin Naktuna. I'm based in Switzerland. I have a banking background, and currently I'm focused on strategic partnerships and business development, mainly in finance, AI, and e-commerce.
Thank you. And now Joe and Glenn, take it away. And they're actually in the same room in the same town for the first time.
Yes.
Yes.
Oh, all right. So let's see. I run Quake Capital. Launched it back in 2017. We've got 8 funds now, about 330 give or take investments, about 500 to 600 founders. We kind of lost track around 500. We are going to launch our next fund in the spring of this year, it's looking like right now. So we don't have a ton of dry powder right now because we're between funds as we finish up. Prior to Quake, I was a longtime operator. That's more where my strength probably lies, is understanding how to build and scale a business. Did that 14 times, 14 startups, exited 9, took a few of them public. Range of exits were between 90 million and 4.5 billion. Made crap tons of mistakes along the way too. And probably learned more from the mistakes than I did from the victories, to be honest. And I learned more from my enemies than I did from my partners, which I'll talk about today probably at some point.
We want to hear about that.
So many of you have heard this, probably only a couple on here that hasn't. My background comes from the public markets. I had the good fortune of joining what we label now a multifamily office. That was, at the time I joined it in 1990, was owned by the bank in Liechtenstein. They had bought it 2 years prior because it was the boutique investment firm and for private wealth in the Bay Area. And the first portfolio, it was right at the epicenter of venture capital, right there at 3000 Sand Hills. So we had a blue chip list of clients, both old money, but some of the new money folks, like Larry Cincini was the first portfolio I was handed to manage in 1990 when I first joined, and I didn't know who the hell he was. So we had a lot of that sort of clients, and I was there when the internet commercialized, and it all happened right under our nose. So I got active in the venture space, and we've been working on a solution to try and bring professional investment practices and disciplines of risk management, data-driven portfolio construction tactics to the early stage venture. That's AngelSpan and our legacy funds division. And we're now launching a fund off our own platform called the Texas Legacy Fund.
So a lot happening in the world these days, guys. I know we did part 1 a few weeks ago. Even since then, it's a whole new world.
since this morning when I got up, it's a whole new world.
I know.
I wanted to revisit something before we really get rolling. And hopefully today we can turn it around too and kind of open up and see what people want to talk about as well. A little bit. But last time we were on, we talked a lot about some of the opportunities maybe that were presenting themselves, and maybe some of the challenges in the early stages of this administration that are presenting themselves for startups. There's one that's kind of come to light a little bit that I did want to talk about. I've gotten a lot of questions from our teams about it. Bonnie, Joe probably too. So a lot of our teams get grants, in addition to state loans and other things. So you got a combination of like National Science Foundation, NIH, SBIR is the biggie. So a lot of these, phase 1, 2, 3 SBIR grants. And a lot of these right now, I got a lot of questions because they're talking about freezing these. And so kind of here's where I'm at on that. I think it's a mixed bag. I think I just want to say, I think for the next 6 to 9 months, it's going to be a little turbulent. I do think that there's going to be some a freeze or a pause or a scale back on the number of grants that are made. But I think ultimately for startups is actually going to be a positive, and here's why. And this ties to something you and I talked about separately. Bonnie, I think you were on the call too. And Joe and I were talking about bidding on some project, from our fund side, Quake had bid on some projects, and Joe with before Texas Legacy had bid on some things. So a lot of these grants, kind of the little known element of a lot of these grants is they're an inside deal. They're an inside job. They already know who's getting. Sometimes they're open to everybody, but a lot of time there's already a front runner, and it's not another company, it's a university, or it's a specific research lab, or it's somebody who came out of the agency or another associated agency. And that's oftentimes what'll happen, or a lot of times it's not necessarily that they have somebody selected, but that's an easy choice to go with a university. So a lot of times you're really not competing against other startups. And this isn't universally true, but it's definitely an element that plays into it, particularly on projects, bigger ones, where you've got multiple states, where you've got entanglements with municipalities or state governments, where it's not just a simple contract to develop some singular technology, but it's something that's got to interface with governments. If you're working on something like that, you're not going to win. Very, very rarely are you going to win. That's going to go to multiple universities. And between you and I, for the most part, they're going to do nothing with it. And it's just going to be a complete waste. That's just based on, that's very biased, but based on my experience. It's biased, but it's based on a lot of experience, hard earned lessons. They don't operate the same way startups do. They don't, there's not an urgency.
Meritocracy wasn't the deciding criteria.
So I think that's going to be interesting. And I don't think it's again, I try and avoid tribalism, partisan, political commentary, whatever. But I think just looking at the landscape and kind of where they're going with this, I think it's pretty clear there's going to be a lot less of those kind of allocations made. You've got a lot of people revolving around the orbit of the president right now that are going to be pushing for more private innovation. Again, whether you agree with it, disagree with it is irrelevant. It's just a matter of whether you can take advantage of it. That's all I'm really trying to get to right now. And I think there is 9 months from now, probably going to be a much more open to small startup opportunity on the grant side. Historically, over the last 5 to 7 years, SBIR has been about it. There's very, very few NSF and NIH loans that go to startups. They do happen. We have several in our portfolio, but in comparative fashion, we probably have 5 times as many SBIR loans.
And what I want to inject in here, because again, we're seeing it already. Both and I have been through the process of applying for NSF grant dollars a few years ago. I actually knew about his application or Quake being involved before I knew Glenn. And the thing that was always striking with me was how unqualified the very people at the NSF were in actually evaluating the grantees or the potential grantees. And that's, as he pointed out, the outcome always was that so many of us that came from industry that were actually working on what they claimed they want to support, they didn't understand what we were doing, and they would default to who their historical recipients were, which is the people that had professional grant writers, knew what these people wanted to hear. And it was just an unbelievably inefficient and ineffective waste of time and our taxpayer dollars. Now we've got people that are going to be occupying those seats that are going to be even more qualified. So it may be less dollars, absolute dollars, but I think that the tempo of decision-making and the quality of decision-making is going to go through the roof.
That, for me, that's a little bit TBD, because I just don't know who's going to be there yet. But I think,
could it be worse?
No. That's a good question. But I think again, though, I guess what I want to convey here is don't stop going after these loans, particularly once this sort of gets sorted out. And the cycle on these is you should be 6 months ahead of them anyway. So I feel like if you're starting to look at these now, for any of you who are thinking about that, and there's several companies on here kind of rattled off what you're doing, where I know there's stuff like, there's things in battery tech, there's things in renewable, absolutely carryover. Will that get quashed? No, I don't think it will. I really don't think it will. I think one of the things that I've said for a thesis for Quake moving forward, I very much want to launch, in addition to just another generalist fund like we do, there's an absolute need for a power fund. And I'm saying this to you, to those of you who are in those fields, there's an absolute need for a power fund. And it's not, there's no pro or against renewable argument in my view. There's death or life. And we
Take or death.
Yeah, take or death. We do not have, for Eddie Izzard fans, we do not have enough power to power everything that we need to power. You guys have probably heard me say this before. So anybody with any sense of the actual challenge that we're facing is not anti-renewable, or for that matter, anti-coal or fossil fuel. We don't have that luxury in the next handful of years, 5 years. We have to pull in every resource we have, because our consumption is going to be so much greater than our capability, and people will literally die, and particularly the poor. And so I believe that that will prevail. I generally believe humanity will protect the people who need protecting at the end of the day. So I think there will be a lot of grants that are already in the pipeline. I would look for those to continue. And I would get in front of that now. I think there's going to open up dramatically, and you're not going to be competing against Vanderbilt, who takes a ton of them, by the way.
Yeah.
You're not going to be competing against all these different universities.
That just get, and they take most of the money and they get funds at administration costs.
And apologies if there's anybody on the call who works in a research lab at a university. I have nothing against that. But if the stated purpose of the grant is for effectively startup innovation, then the money should go
to startups.
That would be my argument. And I think we're going to see that a lot more.
Not bureaucratic institutions that use it largely for overhead. We've seen this coming out of DOJ's efforts, that how much of these dollars that do get granted are still siphoned off as overhead costs at the universities or these other organizations. That's what those things were.
Yeah, and generally these larger, whether it's a large corporation, a research lab, or a university, they're less efficient.
They're just by definition. It's not specific to any one institution. The very nature of disruption cycles, the reason there are disruption cycles is that large institutions, by their very structure, can't innovate, nor should they be the recipient of dollars to help facilitate.
Their cost structures are so much higher and such. Anyways, I don't want to waste a ton of time there, Bonnie, but I did want to let people know that that's
Speaking of energy, I just posted in the chat this solar panel that the Japanese are working on that has the power of 20 nuclear bombs. It's amazing. It's amazing what's coming out there.
Wow.
I followed one of our national labs is the NREL, National Renewable Energy Labs, and they for years put out a quarterly magazine called Innovations. And I read it. I was a nerd on that sort of national lab stuff. Best science in the world comes out of labs. And I read NREL's publication for years. And this is 20 years ago. They said energy production is not the issue, it's energy storage. Because they were always 5 to 10 years ahead of what commercialization was going to look like. So they knew what was coming. And that's something I'll always remember is that, and I've seen, there's all sorts of cool stuff in photovoltaics that blow your doors off. And it's just a cost curve that has to happen. China disrupted some of our own innovation because of what they did with solar panels, but there's unbelievable generation capability. Storage oftentimes is the issue. So according to NREL.
Well, that's what I thought on the old conversation, Bonnie. If you'll indulge me, I have something for the new that I did want to do with the administration. And it's a bit, look, these are all, this whole line of the last time Joe and I were on and this time, historically would be a little bit of a third rail, a little bit of danger talking about some of these. Because if you look at the audience, we're probably got right now about a third of the people on the call hate the administration or dislike it. About a third of the people on the call like it or really like it. And the rest, about 30%, give or take, is, sort of, well, show me state, Missouri, right? So, but I think on this audience, not specific to the people on this call, but if you just look at a typical tech audience, though I think that may be shifting slightly, generally speaking, it's going to be a little bit more, there's probably going to be more that dislike, a little bit less on the other side. That is certainly shifting, I think. By the way, interesting commentary on that. That's going to get real interesting. Whole different conversation, but when I was in Silicon Valley, this isn't what I want to talk about, but I'm just going to share it anyway. When I was in Silicon Valley, Bonnie, you were there too. So 95, 96. It was very libertarian, right? And then it started and then a little indefinitely liberal and libertarian. So libertine, right? And
libertine,
well, a little bit
it's
of
called
that.
the lifestyle.
Libertine is something else, but we'll go with it.
But then about 2003, it started becoming much more liberal and moving the libertarian arm a little bit out of that. But you're gonna see, no, this is where it gets interesting. So this isn't the topic, but this is the kind of thing that founders can learn from, because what's happening in the Valley, companies self-select. So if a founder, let me give you 2 examples. So I was talking about, I did a battery company, renewable fuel cells, hybrid, ultracapacitor battery. I was in that world at one point. And it was much more please forgive me, but the culture of that company was a lot more open, forgiving. If I want to use something that's a little cliche and maybe sounds, some people won't like, a little more of a drum circle, a little bit more of a love fest. Whereas the ad tech company I ran, or the defense company I ran, our sales teams were called hunter killers. Right. And wholly different cultures in those 2 things. Same CEO, wholly different cultures. But what happens is they self-select, right? Nobody's going to come work for you when you've got hunter killer teams in your sales force.
And they want kumbaya.
And nobody's going to come to the kumbaya company, because again, the company reflects a certain personality and it self-selects. Silicon Valley is shifting, and there's going to be, and it doesn't change, just the market moves. So people that would have gone into Silicon Valley that have a certain leaning are going to go into other geographic markets, because they're going to, the cultures are shifting.
Yeah,
the
hunter gatherers moved to Texas.
Well, a lot of them have.
Yeah.
So, I mean, demonstrably so.
Yeah.
But I think you, as a founder, you kind of watch these cultural shifts, and you can take advantage of them in different ways. Like, to some degree, there's going to be people that are available that are going to be off market or kind of out of favor, and easier to pick up because the shift is happening. In other ways, maybe you want to relocate because because you fit the shift and you want to pull in people who are migrating to that market. So there's a lot of things like that you can take advantage of. Okay, so that's a long roundabout. Where am I going with all this? So what I wanted to talk about a little bit is something different than that, but it's effectively what we're seeing in this administration, and it's going to piss some people off. And what I want you to try and do, I took some notes. I want you to do this. Let's do a little bit of a thought experiment. Okay.
A lot of notes.
All right.
He had a long flight though.
Yeah,
so
I did. I had time to
cut the brother some slack.
I want you guys to stop for a minute and consider, without consideration of the people or the policies that are involved or the righteousness of those things, I want you to consider what is happening. So I want you to remove all of your bias as much as you can related to what's going on. Love it or hate it is irrelevant to me. I just want you to look at what's happening. And I was really interested in Trump's first term to see what would happen, because it was the first time in my lifetime that I'd seen a business person, again, love him, hate him, whatever policy, I don't care. But it was the first time I saw a business person brought into that level of politics. I'd seen it locally with some measure of success or failure, but I'd never seen it nationally. I was incredibly disappointed, but not for the reasons you might think, not because I disagreed with policy or liked did none of that. I was disappointed because he didn't come in as a business person. He came in as I would say, a less qualified politician.
He backed into it.
He didn't know
He
what.
didn't expect to win it.
And so this time is an entirely different animal. I didn't necessarily expect it, but I'm seeing it in real time. And I want you to think about some of the things you're seeing right now. And by the way, if you guys get angry as I'm talking about this, then one of us is failing in this thought experiment, either me or you, one of the two. They're attacking this right now the way that I was beyond the 14 startups I did a lot of turnarounds for hedge funds. And they're attacking this like a turnaround project. It looks exactly like a turnaround project. So, and I mentioned earlier that I learned the most, for those of you that don't like the people or the policies, I mentioned earlier as a preface that I learned more in my career from the people I didn't like than I did. Pain is a very, very steep learning curve, and partners don't give you pain. Enemies give you a lot of pain. And so I took a lot of great examples from the people that I was competing with that were nasty, to be honest. But if you look at this right now, I just want you to think they clearly crafted a business plan. I don't know who they is, but the royal they is moving way too fast and too focused. I'll give you a metric on this. So when Trump finished in his first term, by the end of February, he had 100 non-appointment volunteers or employees that were brought in from the outside, not part of the inner bureaucratic circle. He had 1,000 before he took the oath of office this time. And not only did he have 1,000, they were carefully constructed, and you can see it very, very plainly in their response to things.
And he paid for their employment himself outside of what
he had no choice, I think.
Yeah.
I think he had to do that to come in that
The
fast.
transition team oftentimes gets paid for by the government, but he wanted to insulate it from even that.
Well, and he started, I think, 3 or 4 months
And he started
before they would have
early.
even funded it.
That's right.
So there was a plan, just like you would. They looked, when they built the plan, they clearly looked at the vectors of attack they wanted. So think about it from your own perspective. They looked at the problem set. What are they trying to solve? They looked at the weaknesses in the market, the gaps, what had not been addressed. I'll get to that in a minute, but it's clear that they looked at both of those things. Where are you going to start your line of attack? It was clear they looked at that as well. Again, a lot of this is Doge. It is.
That's the instrument. Yeah.
That's the tip of the spear they're using. Again, love it, hate it, irrelevant to me. One of the things that I found fascinating digging into Doge, and I told Bonnie and Joe this offline on a different conversation we had. Fascinating when they first went in, I think it was actually they went into Treasury before they went to USAID. I can't recall the exacts on that, but they went in after the office closed. They go down to the basement. They did 2 hours of skunk works
On the 20th.
and in 2
2
hours
a.m. Yep.
they stopped.
Yep.
This is a little known element. They stopped. Why did they stop? They started up again, but why did they stop after 2 hours? Because they just knew that they needed to pull out whatever they had found at that point and get it to next most important element of this story. The rapid response team.
It was the diagnosis. That 2 hours was the diagnosis.
They pulled out stats that they could get to what I'm going to call, it's the rapid response team, but what it is in a startup is your public relations effort. It's your public relations team. They did that so they could counter. They knew that the first administration, and every administration goes through this, the bureaucracy leaks. And they knew that there would be a narrative created that was counter to what they wanted. So again, this is something when you're building, maybe not a startup, but when you're building a reasonable sized business, you build a plan, you build an attack vector, but you also build an IR and PR component so that you can respond to crisis, so you can respond to requests
and control the narrative
and misinformation
Right.
as you view misinformation, not as the world does, but as you do. Well, they stopped for 2 hours. They put a bunch of ammunition in the hands of that PR team, and then they got back to work. And what's fascinating is the people came in the morning and immediately the leaks started going out. But by that time, the rapid response team was just slapping those things down with real world examples. And they did another thing that clearly revolved around pre-planning. They brought alternative media in the day before all of that. What's her name? Carolyn Levitt?
Yeah.
What's the?
Yes.
the-
Yeah.
She had, the day before, she announced that they would have alternative media in the White House press room, that they would be delivering stuff to alternative. That raised the credibility of alternative media. Again, this is business attacks. These aren't politics. This isn't the way politics is generally done. This is a very fascinating if you follow business. They forged whole new networks, basically, if you think about it. Again, love him, hate him, I don't give a crap. But like Joe Rogan was a credible guy with his audience, but he lived within a small vertical. They're giving an added amplification and credibility to people like that maybe only lived in a certain audience. So that's enhancing. And then this flooding the zone stuff.
Oh,
this is tactical, and it's again something you do in business. I learned this from my worst enemy in business. Like this, I won way more often than I lost in business. And this guy came in, and I won't name him. He's a son of a bitch. I can't stand him, but he is brilliant, and he kicked my ass. And he kicked my ass because he moved faster and he put out more stuff. And there was so much FUD, fear, uncertainty, doubt. There was so much. We would go in to bid on a contract, and he had already been in front of them with 20 different reasons why we sucked. And we were a public company, so he could pull, and he was private, so he could pull all of our public filings that have every little, we might fail because an asteroid's gonna hit the Earth. Right? That would be in our filing kind of stuff. And he would pull that out and say, well, they might die because an asteroid might come. And so they're doing that same strategy with the opposing side, with the bureaucracy, with the media. It is tactical, guys. And again, you can love it, you can hate it, but learn from it. There's some really, really from a fan of business, there's some really cool shit happening here. Now, I'm going to talk. I'll give you an example, a horrible policy. Trump's administration may do the worst possible thing for me,
which is,
well, they're talking about the carried interest tax moving from 23% to 40%.
Well, they're making it ordinary income.
Exactly.
Right.
Which would kill, that sucks for me.
Yeah, we could have an interesting debate on that, and I'd like to, because I'm participating in some of the online debate on that.
I'm not excited about it.
I understand.
Let me put it that way.
But economic theory says that's still labor. You don't have capital at risk. The capital you have at risk as an LP when you're a GP, which you have to have a minimum of 1%, gets capital gains treatment. But the carried interest calculation is literally for your labor, just like
we'll take it offline. I don't want everybody to go insane.
I am interested in this discussion.
But it's from a policy perspective, I got a lot of reasons to be concerned, but I'm fascinated with the business side of this. So I think it's fun. I think it's again, I love elections when they happen because I'm a data scientist.
Yeah.
And there's just this crazy wealth of data that I could look at.
And I got to summarize this section, and we got a lot of hands up. So I suspect, Bonnie, you're going to want some.
Yeah, I was going to say we should take some questions.
I want to summarize what he just said through the funny ass tweet that somebody put out, and they responded to one of the CNN's commentary video clips of them complaining about, I don't know what, I think it was USAID, but he had also moved on, and he threw out this notion of just taking over Gaza. and making it the Mediterranean Riviera, right? To provoke people to come to the table to stop their fighting and sort it out. Otherwise, he will. Now, God knows he's not going to do that, but he got their attention. Okay. And he says, we'll build a resort there. So the tweet was in response to this CNN still doing their, they call it pearl clutching over what they're doing at USAID. And the answer was, bruh, BRU, we're already building golf courses in Gaza. As a way of reflecting the fact that we're moving fast and moving forward. You're talking about last week's conversation. That tempo is flooding the zone is so powerful as a tactic. And yeah, the very nature of bureaucracy, the principal skill that we've had generation of the deep state honing is the ability to build layers of bureaucracy to create inertia, decision-making inertia, distance from personal accountability to outcomes. That's where the bad behavior can actually operate in these layers of bureaucracy. And so they literally do not know how to combat this tempo of flooding the zone. They can't respond fast enough because you've got layers of bureaucracy, and the people occupying those positions have honed their Machiavellian skills of perpetuating bureaucracy and inertia. It's a brilliant strategy.
Well, they also lost control. So and I know we're going to take questions, but there's so many different, they changed the battlescape.
Yeah.
Because they now
change the rules. Yeah.
They're some of the natural advantages that existed and I'm not going to pick the partisan components here, red or blue jersey. I'm just going to say bureaucracy.
Mm-hmm.
Some of the natural things that existed they attacked those almost before they took office.
Exactly. And by the way, yes, Glenn and I fall in the same categories that I voted both sides of the aisle. I voted for Mondale in '84 and Dukakis in '88. So this is not partisanship. We're going to now see with Tulsi getting in there, and then Patel, and then and probably Bobby Kennedy and Hegseth, when they start auditing the Pentagon, you're going to start seeing the GOP deep state screaming like we've been seeing the Dems screaming over USAID and other things. So you're going to see the deep state show their cards, and it has nothing to do with politics. They just tacked an environment where you had predominantly a Democratic support as their honeypot in USAID, but you're going to see the same thing in the Defense Department. That's going to be all GOPers just screaming bloody murder. So that's the good news. When both sides are screaming, you know you're doing it right.
Yeah, in fairness, I've been point blank asked for bribes by both Democrats and Republicans.
I'll bet you have. Bonnie, go ahead. Go ahead.
Yeah, I do want to take some questions from the audience, although I did want to point out, because people were saying, well, it's not always successful when a businessman takes over a country or, is in charge. And I just want to point out that the founding fathers were businessmen and lawyers. And thank you.
And I'm not even commenting on that anyway. I'm not suggesting it's going to be successful or not successful. I'm simply saying it's an interesting thought experiment to look at what's happening and to try and analyze it, learn from it, borrow from it, maybe here and there when it does seem like it's working, but also try and anticipate what's coming next as a founder who knows how to build this sort of stuff.
Yeah. And if you do think about it, Bonnie, and again, this is an important construct to view this whole thing, is that yes, Trump is finally applying business tactics. He didn't in his first term, but look who his C-suite is, his cabinets. These are people that have been in politics, but share the vision. So he's got people that have political experience, but they're not a product of the deep state. That's a really important point to keep in mind, is that while he may be applying business tactics, he's assembled a C-suite of qualified candidates that do have operating experience in the environment they're operating.
And people who actually occupied the other side of the aisle, truth be told.
Domain expertise in politics, but
all right. Again,
we got questions.
Yeah, I got questions. I'm just going to offer one observation on what I think is critical, like a skill that pretty much every, first of all, almost nobody is qualified to be a founder. That's a horrible thing to say, but it's absolutely true. Right. It's just, there are very few people that have the temperament, the the personal capacity to deal with the stress, all the different elements, the place in their life that
It's a
they can do it.
self-selecting process.
The right partner in their relationship partner is able to put up with the bullshit. I mean, it's very difficult to have all the elements to be a successful founder. But one thing that I think makes being in government particularly difficult is that in business, you can't dither. You are decisive. And what I mean, when you say that, people think it means like, go forward, do this. No, sometimes it means don't do this, but you're decisive in a binary fashion.
And what, why?
And there's a really good book. I don't do this a lot, but I'll recommend it. It's a dry, boring ass book. Professor Sample from USC is actually the president, I believe now. But he wrote a book called Contrarian Guide to Leadership. And it was one of the first books I read 30 plus years ago before I became anything. And I wouldn't buy into every single thing in there, because basically the opinion of that book is to put off everything. Like it more or less says wait on decisions. That's not necessarily being indecisive. His view is that you're delegating, you're allowing your subordinate teams to resolve problems that are less important or less strategic necessarily, maybe more tactical, and you're reserving your intervention for the strategic things. I don't use all of that, but I believe you have to be decisive. You do not have the ability to sit in the middle for long periods of time. And that's what government does.
Yep.
It's almost impossible for it not to do it because of the layers.
The inertia. Yeah.
And
The structural inertia.
And so I think it is going to be interesting to watch this. Anyways, I'll shut up. I could go on, but I'll shut up and take whatever you guys want to talk about.
Bring it.
All right, first question. Who has a question?
I have a question. I was also, I'm thinking about the earlier episodes, and Glenn, you had mentioned you had a couple of founders, one with $1 billion valuation and another one with 100 million, and they're ending in a similar place despite such differences.
Yes.
So given, the earlier talk about grants, the shifting political environments, and at the start, a founder is so worried about, the tech, the finances, the team. Maybe they do not fully concentrate or do not know the right structure to start with. And the foundations are so important. So what created that difference? And what would be like maybe at least a couple of structures that's good for the founders? What are the key points, to have a smoother journey?
It can be. I mean, I think I can address that for the specific example. So the things that'll separate generally will be, how proprietary, how strong is the technology, and the barrier to entry obviously plays into it. In this particular case, how many people are required. One of the companies, in order to have, significant revenues, has to have hundreds of people. The other one has 30 in total. One of them, they aren't doing the same amount of revenue. One of them's doing 20 million gross a month. The other's doing 20 million ARR. But they're, again, how much it doesn't matter. That number and the total exit value don't matter to the founder as much as how much they retained.
It's margins.
In that scenario, what I'm talking about in that scenario is the $1 billion founder did so many rounds, partly because their margins are lower, the number of headcount is higher. They had more pivots, which, pivots are a necessary evil. They're not even evil. They're just a necessary part of startups. But every time you do one, there is a quantifiable cost to that, because there's a certain loss of momentum. You have to raise additional capital to kind of gain back that pacing. And so they had more pivots. The bigger company had more pivots. So at the end of the day, one founder owns 70%. The other founder, maybe owns, I'm going to guess 15, give or take. And the one deal is actually currently, the smaller one's going to make more money for the founder. Because he's raising a valuation that's already 150, and after the raise, he'll be at 100. So he's 170 post raise. And that already puts him above the other one, I think, when you do the math, and he'll sell at probably 250 plus.
To summarize it, Zoran, and I know you've got a good financial background, it comes down to the business model, you know, the sales margin and turns architecture. And as a result, oftentimes lower margin, higher revenue businesses are more capital intensive. So which means in the startup world, you got to raise more dilutive rounds of capital until you get to a stable cash flow where your debt becomes a source of capital. So it's business model, which results in cap table.
And velocity too. Now, these two examples are not good for that. I can't give you a great, they don't provide a great example because both of them had pretty good velocity. But if you've got a company that can get to cash flow, that's like the best day in a company. The second best day is the day you get to cash flow break even. The best day in the company is when you get to the point that you've gotten to cash flow break even, but you don't have lumpy, you've got very, very stable linearity, recurring revenue. When you get to that, if you can get to that quickly, and the smaller company got to that in 3 months.
Oh, Jesus. That's
so his raises, he did a raise. We invested, let me give you a sense of how this went. We invested 1.25 million. That was his valuation. Jeez. His next round was 44 million. And it wasn't even a year later.
Jesus.
And then now he's doing one at like I said, 170 posts. Because he got to all of those things, cash flow break even, lots of recurring revenue, very good stability, lots of customers. Because he did that so quickly, he was only doing rounds he wanted to do with the partners he wanted to do them with on the terms he wanted to do them. And he was only doing them for very specific purposes. So like this deal right now, he might waste 20 million bucks, but it's a great opportunity. He has the ability to put a machine, I'm not going to go into detail, but he has the ability to put a machine in every CVS pharmacy in the United States. And he needs money to roll that out nationally.
Yeah, that you can lease, finance, or debt.
Probably. But he needs to still expand staff.
Right.
So, and I'll have to tell you more about the business, but there are so many. The other thing, real quick,
we got a bunch more.
No, but just one quick thing, because it ties into grants, and there was a quick comment at the beginning on that of grants. Be careful on grants. I think a lot of times I see, look, grants are great. They're non-dilutive. We love them. VCs love them. Everybody loves them. When I say be careful, I see a lot of founders waste them. I see a lot of founders get them and they don't give them the same,
because they don't have the expectation placed on them.
Yeah, it's like there's not, and there's a scarcity, there's just a lack of value to it. And they blow them. And sometimes too, grants aren't grants. I'm not going to name names of countries, but some of the grants that come from countries outside the United States.
You mean they have strings attached?
Yeah, they're not grants. They're loans. They're loans named grants, and they own part of your technology.
And to get access to your data.
So, but do be careful with that, I would say also.
Thank you.
Folks, the lesson on that one is be careful what you're asking.
Yeah.
Well,
This is a great question.
Deal terms, it's sort of funny. Brad Feld put it in his book. He talks about it all the time, and he's not wrong. Deal terms are probably more important than any other single aspect.
Certainly valuation.
Yeah.
But that's kind of deal term too. But yeah, you're right.
So we have 2 questions. We have 3 questions. I saw Brian's hand up first.
Actually, I think Ian was first.
Oh, Ian, sorry.
Okay, well, this is not really the question, just a quick follow-up to what Glenn had said about grants. I mean, I'm from Canada, where government support is proportionally more important than it is in the US. And I can definitely support your point that cronyism is a big problem. And, grants going disproportionately to big universities, research organizations, big issue. And also, I agree that many startups waste their grants and they don't use them effectively for a lot of the reasons that were mentioned. So, from our experience, I don't think the kind of standard grant system that is used by some countries so strongly is the way to go. And I'm prepared to give the benefit of a doubt to the current thrust in the US to switching more of that to the private sector. I mean, I think it's worth a shot anyway.
I don't want to just give a little bit of echo on that because I had some experience going. I was asked to speak up in Manitoba, Winnipeg, from a guy from Austin, Bob Warren, that was hired up there to build Winnipeg's entrepreneurial ecosystem. And he asked me to come up and speak. And I was stunned at how much the entrepreneurs in the room were always reacting to or asking questions in the context of this nefarious strings attached because of the government's impact on the tone and the mood of the entrepreneurial ecosystem, because the government were so involved. They were the principal source of capital up there. They did not have a risk-taking culture. And Europe is trying to figure themselves out. And this really reinforces culture impact on entrepreneurial ecosystems. And we see it across the United States. This is what Silicon Valley had the luxury of time to understand about the benefits of risk-taking. And yes, the early R&D was funded by the government, but the one thing that this reinforces is the importance of culture, and a culture that isn't dependent on government. It's really
absolutely. And that's why I'm working for an American company. To be blunt about it. That's
well,
the
you're
reality.
pretty soon you're gonna be the 51st state, so it's not gonna matter anymore.
Yeah, it may be a moot, at some point. We'll see.
Well, so I couldn't let that lie.
I'm glad
we're gonna have Puerto Rico and Greenland as our territory, so you can pick your preferred weather.
Yeah.
Weather.
So I know Dr. Brian was next, and he doesn't have his hand up.
I wanted to ask about the balance. I actually feel for America. Having business people in politics is not a new phenomenon for us in many of the countries that I live. But there has to be a balance, right? Like I think about healthcare in particular. The countries that I see that do really well with it have enough strategic private-public partnerships. It seems like the push now is for more private than public. And the challenge with that I've seen is that you don't own a country. You own a business, but you don't own a country. So you have to think differently from an intersectional perspective. And that was a challenge in COVID, right? If you think about COVID, when I seen around the countries, and as many of you know, I come from a World Health Organization family, when I seen countries closing down hospital wards, CEOs that were MBAs and weren't taking into consideration the clinician's perspective, that was a business decision, but it was not a net value decision. Net value decisions are not about popular opinion. They're the thing that create the greatest good for the greatest amount of people. So I'm saddened by this push towards just more private and not the workings of private public. We need people, as Joe talked about the adults in the room, we need people who understand public service, but they can have a business background.
Yeah.
And I don't know how we get to that common ground, but I really feel for America, because the structural damage of just having one versus the other is uniquely, I'm seeing it in countries here that never come back from that.
There's a structural design feature that's optimal, and it's called, and this is getting a little bit nerdish, so forgive me, but you can look it up, and I wrote a paper about it, or I didn't write it, I grabbed the research and assimilated it. But it's called entropic equilibrium. And equilibrium is the balance you're speaking to. Entropic equilibrium. And what entropy means is the distribution out to the edges of any system or ecosystem of the resources, money, power, information, energy stored, real theoretically labeled and defined. And you don't want to have chaos, because perfect entropic distribution, 100% entropic distribution means chaos. But you don't want concentration either, which has been the problems we're talking about here, right? Power is controlled centrally and then doled out to their favorite projects or their corruptive buddies or all that sort of stuff. It's equilibrium, and it's literally optimal system design is called entropic equilibrium, and it comes under information theory. There's a whole lot of theories. Just go grok, go do AI on entropic equilibrium and the importance of it, because that's really what we're talking about.
I guess where I land on this one is that I'm hopeful. I don't know yet. I'm hopeful. I feel like the rubber band's been pulled far and it's
Pendulum
gonna,
is
somebody's
coming
gonna,
back,
they're
yeah.
gonna let go of it at
Right.
some point, and then it's gonna vibrate somewhere. And I don't know exactly where that lands, but I'm hopeful. You know, if they continue on this trajectory and there's never any modification from this trajectory, then I think that is worrisome. But I think that I think this again, it's shock and awe, it's flood the zone, it's all the same things that he's got a book out there, you can read it, he talks about it,
it's out there.
it's not hidden stuff.
Right, this is open system.
If he's following his, you know, kind of stated methodology, then it's sort of, okay, I'll use another example, though the Canada thing worries me. Sorry, divergence here. Greenland was interesting. I want Greenland. Now we can debate there is some debate about that. I know we've had some discussions of it, but he immediately got a response, kind of what Joe was saying. He immediately got a response. 7 ships that were going to go into, you know, basically environmental use went into patrolling from Denmark, went into patrolling Greenland. Again, you can hate the policy. I don't give a crap about that. But he got a response. He comes in hard and he got a response, and then it worked. Now, the reason I'm a little bit curious about that is he said, look, with Canada, he said 51st state. Oh my God. And then he's like, and I need lock the board and get rid of fentanyl, and they did all of that.
Right.
And I thought, okay, he got what he wanted. And then 3 days later, he said 51st state.
Right. And then tariffs, right?
And I was like, wait a minute.
Right.
So the short answer is I don't really know yet, but I'm hopeful that it's a lot of bluster that will, and a lot of change, hard change, but a lot of bluster and hard change that will move into a rhythm.
Well, and look there's an important concept here, Ken. I'm a nerd on system design, and I was the president of the physics club in high school. So believe me, this nerd goes deep. But it's one of the laws of thermodynamics. A body in motion will remain in motion, or a body at rest will remain in rest until an equal and opposite force causes the inertia to change. Whatever inertia is stable or static or moving in a certain direction, right? So these are laws of physics, and his team understands this. And they had to come hard to get this bureaucratic state that had been going in the wrong direction and had reached its sort of apex. He had to bring in a force. Now, yeah, taking what he says at face value as his true intentional goal, I think is grossly naive. But it is a force.
Look, he scared the shit out of me this last week when he talked about when I'm like the Gaza thing was interesting. The resort community of Gaza thing that came out of left field. That did. I mean, I'm not going to say I wasn't alerted by that, but that didn't necessarily shock me. The one that shocked me was because again, Jordan and Egypt kind of came to the table, whatever.
Right.
The one that shocked me though was ultimatums. Ultimatums are not bravado, bluster. You can't say all the hostages have to be released by Saturday. That's an ultimatum.
Yes, it is.
That I don't want to see. Again, this is off in the range of politics, and I want to really try and avoid that. But I don't love when I see our politicians doing ultimatums. It's a very dangerous.
It's a dangerous thing.
So I'd rather not see much of that.
I'd see shock and awe and flood the zone versus ultimatum.
Yeah, that's what I prefer. But I'm hopeful. I'm hopeful that look, the system is not designed for one person, regardless of how much sway he has or how much popular, you know, whatever. If you want to say I wouldn't call it a mandate, but if you want to say there's a mandate, the system's not really designed to support that any which way. The system is designed to have certain checks and
balances.
It's not perfect, but I'm hopeful.
Well, and again, when you think in terms of, so many of you heard me blather on about my prior career as a securities analyst. And one of the things that's true is what drives value creation, meaning movement in a stock price, is not the absolute level of profitability and margins and sales. It's the delta of change. So that's why some people's investment thesis is investing in turnarounds, because you can make a few things like what happened to Twitter. You lay off some people and you cut costs.
That's a playbook they're running anyway.
Right.
That's
exactly.
a great example.
So turnarounds literally will create value over and above. There was one of the great stocks that was such a great reflection of this, DuPont versus WD-40, the company that makes that solvent that everybody recognizes, their little blue and yellow cans. WD-40 has unbelievable profit margins, unbelievable cash flow, but there's zero change. It's everywhere. It's ubiquitous. So there was no change in their revenue. So no change in their total cash flow on a quarter by quarter and year by year basis. Stock was like a cork on the ocean. It would just kind of bounce along, go up and down and up and down. Where a company like a DuPont that went through a turnaround, where you lay off people, get rid of bureaucracy, get some momentum. They were losing money. Apple was another example of this. Apple almost went out of business. And when they finally started turning around, the stock screamed. They were still losing money. But the delta was the incremental change was directionally positive. Stock grossly outperformed WD-40. So change is where value is created at an enterprise level. Now, our country is a turnaround. And that's what we're seeing. And yes, there's going to be babies thrown out with the metaphorical bathwater. But I would rather see the change. And then we'll isolate the stuff that really we want to come back to and retain than sit here and just do our navel gazing and say, oh my God, aren't we well-intended people? And we have all the fat, the graft, all the crap that's been going on forever. So anyway.
And I'll say this one last thing and I'll let everyone else go. But the exact opposite of entropy is syntropy, right? And so if you think about what you just talked about with change, I don't think that humans are naturally resistant to change. I think they're resistant to how change is experienced because that hits them on the ground, right? And so contextually, the whack-a-mole approach of change, and anyone that runs an organization, you can't just come in and just, just outright do that and don't have strategy in place that people understand. Yes. That's the dynamic I think that I'm most concerned with. Some of the grants hit us here, and I'm just like, okay, we just move on and do what an alternative. It's not a big deal. It's not the first rodeo. So we just move on from there. But to Glenn's point, that does create a lot of opportunities for entrepreneurs. I always tell all these healthcare, digital health companies, you don't have to chase Google, you don't have to chase Apple. If you can solve a medical grade problem that help a clinician work better, help patients live better, it's $11 trillion industry. You can make tons of money.
I love this comment. I really, really love that you hit that. Chaos is like my favorite word in the world. It really, truly is. It is all opportunity in startup world.
Because it's change.
It
creates change.
And so, and again, you don't have to love it. You have to balance you almost have to have a split personality. Yeah. You have to take your political wants, needs, and desires over here, and then you have to say, okay, well, maybe I don't really love where this is, but I can figure out how I can make money for myself, my employees, my shareholders, stakeholders, and you have to sort of do that. And chaos, again, it's sort of like hedge funds. They don't care if the market's moving up or down. And
they just need to move.
I know they're out of favor, but the concept and startups are that in business scale. Yep. I love that.
Yep. You and me both, brother.
I love that.
And if you prepare properly, because the psychology is such an important point of this that we haven't touched on, but you want to be playing offense when others are playing defense and vice versa. Buy low, sell high, right? And you've got to be willing to sell high and not be the last one out selling. You've got to get out, because when other people are caught up with their own greed of extracting the last bit of performance out of some trend, and then when it cracks, they're generally going to be late. And when systems collapse, prices go down. These are all structural behavioral components. It happens far more violently on the way down than the ascension up. And you want to be in the right state of mind. This is Fibonacci wave pattern stuff. This is calibrating chaos. That literally you want to be playing offense when others are playing defense, because when things bottom, people are licking their wounds and they have scar tissue and they're in an emotional state of mind to not see the opportunities that this chaos created.
Yeah.
And to buy low. They're waiting for validation and they'll be followers. So these are really important components of being opportunistic in chaos.
I think this is compounded too, because people do get caught up in their politics.
Oh yeah, God.
And again, I'm not faulting anybody for that, but from a business perspective, I mentioned it the last call. you can hate what the guy says, I don't care. He's talking all the damn time. Like, from a startup founder's perspective, I freaking love it.
Because he proved he's completely transparent.
Well,
You
I
know
don't know
what he's thinking.
I don't know if he is or not, but he's spewing it. It's all like it's constantly out there.
Yeah.
So you're like, there is a constant barrage of opportunity data.
That's information.
And again, you have to categorize, you have to quantify, or
You have to characterize it.
yeah,
Yeah.
what's quality of the data?
You have to frame
okay?
it and characterize it,
So
yeah.
there is that, but it is so wild how
Yeah.
much daily opportunity this is.
Yeah. Play offense, baby. When everybody else is losing their shit, that is a huge opportunity. So
I'm gonna do well. I don't know how the politics are gonna go here, but I'm gonna do well in startup world.
Bet your ass.
right now. So
we gotta let some other hands get answered. We gotta do much.
Yeah.
Thank you, Brian, as always.
That's good stuff.
Josh.
Oh, hey, okay, I'll put my, thanks. Okay, so when we talk about renewables, the big issue I've seen, and I don't know if you see this, it's not an issue of the renewable technology. It really is an issue of supply and demand. Because, we look at the mess that's happened with trying to electrification in different cities, is how do you get that energy to consumers? Yeah, I don't think that I don't know if there's enough there.
Look, I've got 2 sentences of comment and then I've got to just tap out because this is, being reasonably aware of the issues of our energy grid and energy infrastructure broadly defined at a macro level. It comes down to logistics of, just as you said, it's not just the total volume of supply, it is distribution. Right? And in energy, you're talking about, so you got optimal system design is small regional grids, small nuclear power, small sources of energy with small infrastructures they're serving. Unfortunately, the utilities industry started big and is now threatened by the grid's change, which the grid itself is changing and the source of energy is changing as the grid's architecture is changing. That's my take and my observations, but I could be really over my skis.
I don't think you are necessarily. I think this is a question that entirely depends on the company, though. So, like I was mentioning earlier, battery tech, which I've played quite a bit in, and fuel cells and all of that. I've played in all of those. So portable, storable power. And so there's a lot of different things that happen. Subsidies can create challenges and problems. Trying to influence buyer behavior is never really a great business model to build on top of when you see, because you don't control. Let me give you an example. It's very similar to building your technology on top of a platform like Facebook, for example. You don't control, if you don't have full control of the marketplace or the platform you're delivering on, you can come in tomorrow and it doesn't work, okay? Now, there are things you can do to mitigate that. Well, when the government is subsidizing or otherwise trying to influence buyer behavior, that's an element of your customer relationship you do not control. And that's a really, really dangerous thing. So be very careful of that. Another thing I saw looking at small storable power, separate from what I was just talking about, which applies to lots of different things. But we have to be really, really careful too, as I think we have like a fiduciary obligation, a steward obligation as startup founders. And I'm going back in my time as a founder. I saw so many situations in developing technologies, particularly in the energy space, where there were companies that should not have been funded. There were technologies that were not what they claimed to be, had significant impossibilities, laws of physics problem, like real issues.
And they create noise in the system.
Well, and they take money out of the fly, like they remove momentum and capital from these are closed systems. People don't realize it, but basically if you take a fund and it makes money, it recycles that capital. If it's a specialist fund, it recycles that capital into the things they specialize in. The flip side of that is if they get burned and if they get destroyed, and fuel cells are a great example. There's some tremendous technologies in fuel cells. There was also 20 years ago, 15 years ago, some terrible snake oil. And
Yeah.
a lot of funds invested in the snake oil and probably set that industry back 10 years. And I'm not joking. Like, I know funds who did not put capital to work for like 10 years. And so innovation stalled. So I think there's a combination of things that go into these markets, and you have to be very, very careful, but they're highly dependent on the scale, as kind of Joe was getting at to some degree, whether they're geographically centric, do they have to be in a particular space? Are they heavily reliant on subsidies? Are they reliant, again, a lot of these parts are highly specialized. They take a lot of time to get, 6-month lead times in some cases. So there's a lot of different things that come in and energy is a fascinating market. By the way, I did want to see, you're in Israel, right?
I live literally around the corner from where Better Place was.
What's that?
Do you ever hear of Better Place?
Yes.
I live like in the same town.
Oh, okay. So the reason I was bringing it up was that they're one of the examples. They're very good about helping their startups in Israel.
But they own you.
But they own the technology in a way. If you try and move it out of Israel, if you try and acquire it out of Israel, there's a lot of challenges. So just be very careful. I'm never going to tell a founder to not take cheap or free money. Nothing's free, by the way. I'm never going to.
Now you have to raise half the funds, and they'll only give you half.
But even there, you have to be very, very careful. I would just say the terms. I'm going through an exit right now. I knew all this well before this, but we're going through an exit right now, and they're the sticky wicket in the whole thing. We've got 12 funds in the deal, lots of capital. Microsoft, Amazon, Google, Apple are in the deal. None of those are problems. Israel. I love it, but it is what it is. It is what it is. All right.
Yeah, I think with the bytes, we've actually not even looked at it because we're actually using for manufacturing, we're using existing manufacturing, and we've got a battery company in India we're working with. So we're
great battery tech coming out of India. Great.
Yeah, and it's also we can avoid the China tariffs this way, so we're not locked into heavy tariffs, which is the thing we were worried about.
Smart.
Yeah, and just to also point out that the whole thing is trends always go this way, and then it's always one nutcase that literally comes along and just blows it all out. Yeah, I remember my uncle was at BMW, and this is like years ago, and it was when Tesla were coming out. And I asked them, I was like, "Are you guys paying attention to this?" And they were like, "Oh, we're gonna just reinvest in our technology and make it more eco-friendly."
Ah, yes.
And I'm like, "Yeah, that was a good move."
Startup founders I always joke, they don't think outside the box. They don't know what the box is. They threw it away a long time ago.
Yeah, and then also just to point out about the whole coming out in the press, remember Edison helped invent the electric chair to discredit Tesla and Westinghouse.
Yeah, right. Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. That's a great story, by the way. That's a really good metaphor and real story.
Yeah.
Yeah. Crazy one.
We got more hands. We got
more hands. Yeah.
We have to. Henry.
Yeah, hi there. Yeah, I just want to make a comment on the previous discussion about grants. I've seen a lot of examples where the sort of grant tail is wagging the business dog, so that businesses are making decisions in order to get a grant that really aren't good business decisions. For instance, in Canada, they have these scientific research and development credits. And there are many other credits where you have to have labor. So I've seen examples where businesses basically hire people that they truly don't need to research something and innovate something that's not very innovative, instead of sort of concentrating on the product that they do have and selling that, but they need the cash. So they kind of lose focus because of these grants that I see as as a funding source. So they do get some money, but it's not very efficient
Practical.
finance.
Yeah.
It's the strings
That's
attached.
that's a phenomenal point, by
It
the
is.
way.
Strings attached are dangerous, and oftentimes, they run counter to the very optimal entrepreneurial behavior of scrappy, right? Don't hire until you really need it, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah, I think another thing real quick, it doesn't have to come in the form of grants even. So, well, maybe it is. And during COVID, we saw a lot of, I may have said this on another call. If I did, I apologize, but during COVID, you had those PPP loans, but you had to keep staff, right? So you had to keep your employees. Well, there's a lot of cases where that wasn't a good idea.
Wasn't a good business decision.
Sales were way down. They would have been much better off not taking the money, reducing headcount. Growth was massively slowed, so they have to go into somewhat of a hibernation. There were a lot of cases where the PPP loan was the worst thing that they could do.
Yeah.
And so it's a combination, like just what you were describing with loans, sometimes other things arise like it. And that's such a good point to be careful.
Well,
you really have to think it all through.
Well, and it's to pile on that topic, but we've sort of beaten this horse dead. But our firm actually had our revenues go up during COVID. Right? We didn't qualify for some of these things. So they were throwing money at businesses that oftentimes failed as a percentage of the total recipients of those dollars. But your qualifying criteria is, did your sales go down? And I thought, wait a second here. This is not Darwinian capitalism at work here, for crying out loud. You know, you shouldn't have, if your revenue went down during COVID, as an exclusion, as your criteria. Why wouldn't you support companies that also had their revenue go up during COVID? What does that say about those companies?
Yeah, that was a disincentive.
Yeah, it was, and like I said, it wasn't a large chunk of money for us, so I kind of dismissed it, but it was a poignant point. I thought, wait a second.
No, it's an interesting observation though.
Yeah.
Want to align the incentives. Same thing you do in your startup. You've got to align the incentives at the employee level, the customer level, every supplier level, every level.
Incentive design matters. This goes back to the political conversation. So many things that we've talked about, cap table, who you allow on your cap table, incentive design matters.
Yeah, we used to have an old joke. This is off topic, I guess, in a way, but we used to say customers will never do what you want, need, desire. They only do what you incent.
Right. Well, that's
reward or punish.
That's right. Same thing in politics. That's humans.
Yeah.
Right.
Writing this down.
Great point, though.
Yeah.
So Sarah has another question.
Yes, so it seems that whatever happens in the next few years, volatility will be a given, and data will be quite important in that environment. And knowing a little bit what Joe is trying to do with angel funds, there'll be a significant valuable data creation, I think, when this endeavor goes through. Would you consider to be not? I mean, you're in VC business, but it's almost like you can be in data business, like quality data business, alternative data, and how much insight or prediction you think this can light to an opaque sector like VC, because it's not publicly traded.
Thank you for that, and I don't. Again, many of you on the thank you. That was a softball. And I am a stickler for incentives and system design, and as you can probably tell, and this is something that I'm very proud about our business model, that I've had people that know what we're doing ask this very question: what are you gonna do with the data? And early on, when we launched AngelSpan's core data gathering service called our investor relations service, we literally were the first to have structured real-time operating data on startups. So this is that kernel of information advantage you're talking about. It's more than data, it's information. Data in its raw form is noise. Go get a Bloomberg terminal, you know what I'm talking about, right? It's information because it's longitudinal and standardized and objective. And I had VC say, I'll pay, are you going to sell subscriptions? I'll pay for a subscription. And our model was never to monetize our clients' data. That's their data. The information we're extracting from their data, we're going to give away. We're literally going to give it to our startup clients so they can benchmark themselves, obviously anonymizing everybody but their own data. so they can actually improve their outcomes. But also with our legacy funds network, where we license our platform to others that want to launch venture funds with best-in-class data. We're going to give the data to them as well so that they can not only look at their own portfolio holdings that's made their way into their own licensed legacy fund based on their own thesis, but benchmark their portfolio companies, because our model says you need to invest across multiple rounds. And how do you select your next company to go from the seed round to the A round? They've got to perform relative to their peers inside the fund, and you optimize those decisions by also benchmarking them against their peers across the network. So that's a great question. It is.
Yeah, that's very interesting. So
of our model.
someone like Glenn can potentially get predictability.
Why do you think we're sitting here together? What do you think we're going to do after this call?
That's why I'm curious. That's kind of, I don't want to openly ask, but I realize
now you
something
understand why this
for me.
relation. Yeah, you got it.
And I think, you know, you raise a great point, though. I think, you know, your model is a little bit different, but curated data, you put it a little differently, but curated data, which is sort of like the information side, but it's scored data, okay, is critically important for AI. And AI's run out of pools of data, basically, at this point. So now we're at the point already where we're private pools.
Yeah.
And it's going to get real interesting because AI is already starting to hack networks to get to data, not with consent of the developers, but on its own to try and get to more data. And companies like mine, and certainly companies similar to yours, but not yours maybe, but are going to start really defending their data because it is highly proprietary and curated and valuable, to your point. And so you're going to see opportunity both in the data, the security of the data, the sale of the data, or the licensing more likely of the data.
Let's call it monetization of the data.
Yeah, it's going to be some interesting. And then going back to my days in ad tech, you really have to think about, you know, aggregation of data versus and anonymizing the data versus personalization. So this is, there are so many opportunities around AI and data right now. It's where I think I don't really love AI. I love that side of AI myself.
Oh, and think about what they're doing with agents now. What they're making it easy then, because people said, "Are you using AI on what you're doing?" I'm going, "You guys have no idea. It's going to get so easy." I go look up Google patents. I have a patent on an algorithm matching investors and entrepreneurs based on objective and qualitative data. All right. Yeah, we're going to dust that off, and AI is just going to make it easier to make it a little bit more accurate. But what I learned as a money manager, because I used data provided by data vendors to manage money, and that data clearly was available to all my competitors, and yet I outperformed them. Both of our data vendors gave us their personal money because we were the best of all their customers at using their respective data tools. So when data is a commodity, it's how you use it is your competitive advantage. It's called a process edge. It's not an information edge or information advantage. It's a process advantage. And when you start having good longitudinal data, then you can optimize on the process of using that information that comes from that data. AI is just a tool to make augment your process, to make your process better. It's not about data and data accuracy. People get really wound around the axle around more data. They're actually sowing the seeds of their own destruction. I've seen it in the public markets. It's called oversimplified analysis paralysis. You've got to be able to focus on the right information, but most importantly, know what to do with it, where process is your edge. Anyway, I could go on for hours on that topic. So.
And yeah, big key that I see, again, as a data science guy, I see a lot of people failing to baseline the data, to basically, one of the things you see it in the elections. I try and stay out of politics, but
no, you don't.
I do, but they have some of the best data. So when the election was playing out, you would see these polls come out, and it's fascinating to see how people treat the data. A lot of the data is coming from one place, from YouGov, and these various outlets are pulling in the data they want, but they're not baselining it. So you have to go through a process to make it all relatively equal across the different pools that you're looking at, or it doesn't make any sense. So you have to score data, the data itself has to be curated and reliable. Then you have to go through the process of baselining it. There's a whole lot of things that have to go in. And by the way, AI is not even AI, no question it's changed, but it's been around since 1956.
Yeah.
It's not a new concept. It is absolutely better. It is infinitely more accessible. That's the biggest difference. And it's much easier to build around, but it's not new. So it's always frustrating to me.
At its core, all AI does is the same thing that Moore's law did to computers. It just makes processing of information faster.
Yeah.
Unless you understand that and use speed as your advantage, that means improves your process, your decision-making process.
There's a negative there too. Speed isn't always your friend. Okay,
I agree with
there's a race to the bottom that happens in every industry, and they're there.
Oh, yeah. Oh, absolutely.
And it's on the data side.
They're not looking at the second, third derivative of implications.
Yeah,
They're looking at the first derivative and
So
competing.
there's some,
Right.
yeah, that's why I'm a little bit hesitant on that. Yeah.
Yeah, and again, we could go on for hours about this, but there's so many examples where technology curved. Michael Dell was brilliant as a 19-year-old because Dell was never a technology company. He let everybody else compete on the race to the bottom on advancing technology, the hardware manufacturers, chips and data storage and all that sort of stuff. He had a process advantage. He leveraged their competitive instincts to spend the R&D money to advance technology. He was simply a supply chain expert. That's all Dell ever was, because they assembled the computers based on the technologies. All these other people were spending the huge amounts of capital to compete at the R&D level. He just let them fight it out and kept grabbing the latest advanced technologies, let people design their own laptops and desktops online. It's brilliant. Brilliant. Anyway, Josh has got a question. Sorry, buddy.
Yeah.
Josh has a question.
Yeah, actually, I was just joking with someone earlier today. You know, iTunes is just Napster with a paywall.
What is?
iTunes is Napster with a paywall.
No, there you go. Yeah, first mover isn't an advantage.
Yeah.
First mover is that's a euphemism that is so heavy in its overuse.
Yeah. Also, so we've gotten it. One of the things we've noticed with the data, because we've done like data, is we're getting this data back. So we're trying to find what is the issue with electric motorcycles, because they've not really taken off like electric cars. So we're doing, we're going over the data, and they keep telling us they want more technology. The data comes back, they want more technology, right? So I'm cheeky enough to put into Hells Angels Facebook groups surveys, and they all come back and say, you're giving us too much technology. We want the raw feeling of a motorcycle. Stop throwing all this technology on us. So what I've gone back and looked at the data. They're asking people that either are interested in riding bikes, electric bikes, or have never actually ridden a motorcycle but would buy an electric bike. So they're not actually asking people that ride motorcycles.
Go figure. Shocking, right?
Yeah. Yeah. When I was working in some of the renewable space, and I didn't get there with it, but we started building a motorcycle to take to Sturgis. Like to ride to Sturgis, and we were gonna try, because it was a fuel cell derivative. So we thought we could get there on one, like basically without having to stop to refuel. Technically recharge. We just didn't get the bike built in time for that. But yeah, that's a really fascinating. I love that story actually.
Yeah, it's just crazy because the data doesn't, the consumer feedback doesn't, like we're literally now going back and doing new consumer feedbacks to kind of figure out what's going on there.
They are really, as somebody who actually rides a motorcycle, I'll tell you, they're very pleasant. I would tell you, I would have hated, I got a 56 Indian that is, rattle your teeth out, but it's the old, it's a Norton motor on that thing. I don't know how many people know that, but on that 56, but and everything's reversed on it.
Mhm.
But when you get on an electric cycle, it is actually a great experience. It's quiet, it's smooth, it's actually a fantastic, for a person, there is a certain amount of needing to try it.
Did you ever see that movie World Fastest Indian?
Oh, yeah, with what's his name?
Yeah, Anthony Hopkins.
Yeah.
Anthony
Well,
Hopkins.
Is in the Hall of Fame at Bonneville. And his car was they asked for his car to be in the movie and he just didn't even bother. He was a crusty old guy, but he'd been racing in Bonneville since 52.
Wow.
He knew Burt Monroe. Move on. All right.
Yeah, if you stop me on bikes, I could literally talk. My wife will kill me because I won't get off the call.
So
Anyway.
does anybody else have a question, or do you guys have any other comments? I know Glenn has a whole page of topics, so I was wondering if there's anything else that you really want to hit today. I mean, Joe, no, Glenn, right, Glenn.
Us or the, I'm sorry, Bonnie, the beginning of that, I couldn't make out. What did you say at the very beginning? Us or somebody else in the crowd?
No, I was wondering if anybody else had a question.
Yeah.
If not, I know you have a whole page there of topics.
Oh, no, I'm not trying, I don't need to monopolize. I'd rather hit on things people want to hear about.
So what does anybody want to add or comment on? As long as it's not motorcycles, Josh.
No, I got logged off, so I'm just saying bye.
Oh, okay.
Dare we touch on the carried interest debate?
Only if it's of interest to people. It's of interest to me, so you and I are gonna cover it.
Yes, we are.
Anybody dealing with looking at it, we kind of got a mixed crowd still on. We've got some people in finance, we've got some people on the startup side, but yeah. Curious if anybody
I have
has
a quick question here. Recently, I founded a company with several of our friends. And recently we face a problem whether a early stage startup should have a fixed cap table or not. And I would like to know more from all of your experiences or suggestions.
Help me understand what you mean by a fixed cap table. How are you defining that?
Basically, we need to figure out how much equity that each of our founders or team members would like to have. And that's kind of weird for us since we just won a pitch contest last year. So we registered a company would like to keep all of things up and running. But originally we had a agreement that we would like to build the product first, to run the MVP first, then reach out to more of the capital in the end. But something happened, so our team members is trying so hard to find out grants or the capital first, then that makes all of our team members don't know what to do since the group is so dynamic at first. So it's so hard to decide the equity or the cap table at this moment. So I think, yeah, I would like to know more about.
It's a really good
It's a great question.
Yeah.
And this I'm speaking from personal experience and observation with our own clients. Whatever your founder sharing ownership is, make sure that you don't just grant the ownership right up front. You own a third, everybody owns a third. Whatever the percentages is, you'll sort out. But make it vested. Even founder shares need to vest, because once you start digging in, you'll find somebody is going to get their knickers in a twist and or become dysfunctional, and they're going to need to be fired. And you don't want somebody that was dysfunctional to have their equity ownership after 18 months or 9 months or 6 months, and you kick them out because it's best for the business, but they still retain their share. So a typical vesting is a 4-year vesting with a 1-year cliff. Okay, so they have to be there at least a year before they own 25% of their, call it 1/3, if that's what you guys all sort out. And then beyond that, I'll defer to this expert.
No, that's great input. The other thing I would say is be careful about, you'll see a lot of times, how many founders do you have?
Now we have 5 people in our team, but the major 2 founders, they are so worry about the financial, the cap table thing, something like that. Yeah.
Okay. So that raises a couple things. So when you're funding a business as a VC and you see like a imbalance in the cap table, that raises a question, not necessarily a red flag, but a question, because generally when you have one founder who has 40%, two founders who have, 10%, one with 5, like these weird numbers, then there's a dysfunction that will develop, an animosity that'll develop, it just long-term doesn't work. So but sometimes you do need that. Like you even said, we have 2 primary founders. So what I generally, and it may or may not be popular, but what I generally suggest to teams that are in that situation is you have 2 founders and you have 3 members of a core founding team, but they're not, if you're not going to if everybody's not going to have 20%, then there needs to be some distinction between this group and the group that has more. And it needs to be laid out up front. Otherwise, there's going to become this friction that develops, and it almost happens universally.
Yeah.
So I'd be careful about that. The other thing that 2 quick things. 1, 5 is a lot of founders. It's not a horrible number. And I've said this many times on these calls, so some people have heard this, but Startup Genome is a great resource for what works and doesn't work. They look at thousands of startups every year and they categorize the data. 1 founder teams are pretty miserably, they're hard. They don't do well because they don't, lots of reasons, don't have support. Again, they're not getting a creative mind flow from multiple points of view. 2 is better than 1, but it's still not amazing. 3 is pretty optimal, does usually very well. 4 holds well, but you start to move the other direction when you get to 5. And part of that is the decision-making process becomes very difficult. And so and also when you start to bring in real money, you're going to find that the VC are much more comfortable talking to 1 or 2. They're not going to want to talk to 5 founders.
Makes sense.
I will not do it. Okay,
Yeah.
to be blunt, I'll do it when I'm training them, but I'm not going to do it on an ongoing basis because it's inefficient and it's not how decision-making happens in a startup. It's much closer to a dictatorship than it is to a democracy.
That's right.
Regardless how people want to characterize it. And so at the end of the day, there has to be a couple strong voices and some supporting characters that lead into and provide input into those voices. But those are some of the challenges you're really going to have to be careful with as you go forward.
And you can model what those roles are. You're going to have let's say in your example, the 2 principal co-founders, you've got Mr. or Mrs. Inside and Mr. or Mrs. Outside, and have to respect both of their contributions. The respect is the critical part of that. Everybody else then will naturally gravitate to what their personality is to Mr. Inside or Mrs. Outside, right? It doesn't matter that next level because they'll have a natural flow of communication based on personal style. But yes, the bifurcation of authority is critical, and those 2 you oftentimes need somebody in your founding team that's inside and outside. And the respect and importance of each one of those functions has to be bidirectional, because that's where it breaks down as well. If Mr. Number 2, Mr. Inside, is the tech, not operations, but tech, and it's a product-oriented company, they're going to think because they're the product guy, they're going to have more authority, and they could undermine Mr. Outside, whose job is to raise money and talk to the outside. I mean, we've all seen it all, but these are the best practices, and the way to really orchestrate what you're talking about these are the components of this. I call it system design, right? Optimal design first. If you don't get that right, you're guaranteed to have dysfunction, virtually guaranteed, or 90-some% probability, shall we say.
Much appreciated. That's so helpful. Thank you.
We do talk to founders with their problems too. So anybody else? Otherwise, I know we've gone over time. I am going to give you guys the last word, and I am going to invite you back again because it's always so much fun and it's always so informative. No matter what.
I haven't gone through the comments yet. How many? Did we piss anybody off?
Yeah, come on. Yeah, we had to piss somebody off.
You lost a bunch of people when you started talking about politics. No, I'm kidding.
There you go. Well, if we're not pissing both sides off, we didn't do our job well.
I'd go back to the chaos commentary. I think this is just, again, Regardless who wins, who loses, the more change and disruption there is, more for a small company, the more opportunity there is.
Absolutely. And again, going back to my money management days. When everything goes well, I found I got really antsy, and where there was chaos, I loved it. I tended to pay offense when others, I just conditioned myself to that, right? Glenn and I both had sports in our background with a certain level of success. And oftentimes, if you have skills and capabilities, then you also like that. Okay, that's where people with talent actually thrive. It's when others are losing their shit. When it's easy, everything's easy and we have a rising tide, then idiots can look successful. And they're successful for oftentimes the wrong reasons, or at least they're taking credit for their success in the wrong manner. And people that actually are there doing it well, but not trying to be the narcissistic person that is just trying to capture a spotlight. There's lots of noise in the system when you have just, it seems to be easy to be successful, right? There's a phrase in the public markets is don't confuse brains with the bull market. And that's another way to euphemism to characterize that. Chaos means talent actually does ultimately become the winners.
What was the name of that website?
What's that?
Which website?
What was the name of the website for the startup data that you recommended?
The Startup Genome Report, and look for they put out reports monthly and they put out reports at the end of the year. You're looking for their year-end report.
Their annual one is good.
Their annual report that's focused on startup failure. Basically, I think they call it, there's a great, it's almost like the murder book or whatever.
Right,
it's a great name, but you're looking for the one that
Graveyard or something.
They look at over 5,000 startups every year, and they interview them, and they, look, a lot of times if you ask a founder why they failed, it's going to be, it'll be things like lack of access to capital, or it'll be like, it might be a simplified view, and each of the founders might give a different answer, but they go through the process of talking to the founders and finding out why they believe they failed, talking to the investors and finding out why they believe the startup failed. And it's a very interesting,
one of the metaphors I love is the old metaphor of three blind men touching an elephant. Right, they're touching different components of the elephant, and they're, as a blind person, they're saying, no, the elephant is long and skinny, that's touching the tail, and it's wide and flat, one's touching the, right, and they're all right, but they're also wrong at the same time because they don't have a complete view. And that's where Startup Genome Report does a better job of distilling down all these thousands of entrepreneurs that are touching their own component of that failure elephant and describing their personal experience. But when you collectivize it, it actually gives you a really nice objective characterization.
That's a good way of putting it.
I said, I made light of the not having capital, but it's funny to me, usually I'll talk to a lot of startups myself, obviously. And a lot of times I'll talking to them after they failed, and they say, we failed because we couldn't get this, we couldn't raise our next round.
Right.
And I'm like, well, that's not why you failed.
That's not why you failed.
You failed to raise the next round for some fundamental reason.
That was a symptom.
Yeah.
That wasn't the cause.
Something caused you not to be able to raise that round, frankly. So it's always amusing to me, but you'll see that in there.
And by the way, Bill Gross did the best study that I've always seen, because when I see all these studies, I try and say, well, the elephant was best analyzed and characterized by Bill Gross. He's a scientist. He's a Jet Propulsion Lab scientist in Southern California. He was the most rigorous and objective scientific approach to identifying failure and success. And he distilled it down to 4 reasons, and he prioritized them and what percent contribution. And the number 1, almost twice as much as number 2, is simply timing.
Yep.
Timing. You couldn't raise money because of timing. You didn't find product market fit because of, timing is the number 1 determining factor. Number 2 was product market fit, which is downstream from timing. Execution broadly defined, which is some of the human capital leadership issues. And number 4 was access to capital. When you break it down, now again, a lot of these roll into timing, and timing affects some of those other things. But at its core, and my view is always from an investor perspective. How do you be a better investor in this asset class when you can't predict optimal timing? Because we can't predict the future.
Right.
And entrepreneurs, God bless them, are thinking they can. And that old adage of, or metaphor of being an entrepreneur is like jumping out of an airplane and assembling the parachute on the way down. And that is so true, because you got to figure shit out on the way down, and there's an urgency to it. And some are better than that or others, and those that aren't successful are sort of culled out of the gene pool.
Yeah.
Right?
There's this, yeah. I mean, it's a survival instinct, no matter how you slice it. So.
Yeah, yes. And that gets down to scrappiness and pivoting, right? Changing your strategy, being willing to understand the necessity to do certain things, blah, 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 blah. But it's a really wonderful metaphor.
Thank you.
Timing's real.
Timing is real.
I mean, I've never been late. I've been early.
I've been early. Yeah. That's
Early is what, and Andreessen actually said this, and I'm not sure you're a fan or not. It's sort of like politics. And you look at Mark Andreessen and say, well, there's value in his experience and his success. And also I want to keep him at arm's length.
Yeah.
But one of the comments he made, which I thought was, it resonated for me, was that he said the biggest failures are from the companies that had all the things that looked like it was a good deal, but the failure was always timing because they were early. So visionaries can be and tend to be early.
Yeah, I'd always rather be, again, I'd rather be early
than late.
I'd rather disrupt than
Exactly.
You know,
yeah, being a follower,
iterative.
those business models don't last anyway. You know, that's what anyway, we could go on for hours about that topic alone. So anyway, we're at 2 hours coming up, Bonnie.
I know we should cut it off. I'm going to invite you guys back again, and I know it'll get political, but so it goes.
It's always fun.
2 hours is short for you guys.
I know.
It's never enough.
It never is.
Have a great one, everyone.
Thank you, guys.
Thanks.